Welcome to another podcast of the Apologist bookshelf. Gary Zacharias here. This is not a very, optimistic book to talk about. This is a new one for me. Came out a couple of years ago. It's called Live Not by Lies. Rod Dreher is the author. And I guess what bothers me is I think what he's writing about is happening. And I don't like to see what's happening in this country. But on the back it says, survivors of communism have a warning for us. It can happen here. And so some people that comment on it, Touchstone magazine, I like Touchstone. It says, Christians who care about the future of the gospel in America should give heed to Dreher's manual. Live Not by Lies is a timely, perhaps even prophetic book. And see, that's what bothers me. If it's prophetic, it means it's coming. And I worry about that some. God's in charge, so okay, if I'm worrying, that's my fault. Dreher is a senior editor at the American Conservative magazine. He's written for a lot of different journals and all. He's had commentaries in the Wall Street Journal. He wrote The Benedict Option. That got a lot of controversy. Kind of the basic idea, I think. I haven't read it, but I think the idea was, as Christians, we're entering another dark age in our society. We better team up and become the flame that's going to hold out against the darkness that's out there. Anyway, so the book came out a couple of years back, and I'm just going to kind of walk through it gradually. Let me start it here. Let's take the first page here. It's called Understanding Soft Totalitarianism. That's what he calls it. And he tells a story about a Jesuit priest in 1943 who fled Croatia, just getting a little bit ahead of the Gestapo, and he settled in Czechoslovakia. And he took up the name Kolakovic, and he took up a teaching position in Czechoslovakia. He was about 37 years old, and he'd spent some of his priestly training studying the Soviet Union. And he thought if Nazism is defeated, there's going to be a huge conflict eventually between the Soviet totalitarianism and the liberal democratic West. And he worried about what was happening in the Christian West, a lot of rich situations and materialism and things like that. But he was really concerned about the dangers of communism. And so by the time he reached his area in Czechoslovakia, the Red Army was coming in because they defeated the Germans. And in 1944, the Czech government that was in exile made a formal agreement with Stalin, saying to Stalin, guaranteeing that after the Nazis got out, the Soviets would give the reunited nation its freedom. Well, Father Kolakovic knew how the Soviets thought. He knew this was a lie. And he warned Slovak Catholics, when the war's over, watch out, Czechoslovakia will fall to the rule of a Soviet puppet government. And he prepared them for persecution. He said, get ready, it's coming. He preached that you needed a total life commitment to Christ. That'd be the only thing that would help them withstand the coming trial. In fact, here's a quote from him. Give yourself totally to Christ. Throw all your worries and desires on him, for he has a wide back, and you will witness miracles. And so he said it's got to be real. It's got to be communal. And he did a lot of work. He established cells of faithful young Catholics who came together for prayer and for study and fellowship. He taught those young believers that every person has to be accountable to God for his actions. He says you have to live within the truth. In fact, the motto for what he called them his family, but for the people he worked with, was see, judge, and act. And what he meant by that, see was to be awake, look around, see what's going on, it's the reality. Judge meant to discern what these realities mean, and what you know to be true, especially when you compare them to the Christian faith. And then after you reach a conclusion, his third word was act. In other words, resist evil. So he created this wonderful community of religious people in the face of what was out there. Well, in 1946, although he was successful and he did get a lot of people involved, but the Czech authorities didn't like that, and they deported him. And then 2 years later, 1948, the communists took total power, just as he had predicted. And all those people that believed in him and trusted him and all, they'd been imprisoned. The church was brutalized into submission. But When these people got out of the prison in the 60s, they began to do as he had taught them. They set up Christian circles. They built an underground church. And it became the principal means of anti-communist dissent for 40 years. They organized this big 1988 public demonstration in the Slovak capital demanding religious liberty. It was called the Candle Demonstration. It was the first big protest against the state. It kicked off what was later called the Velvet Revolution, and it brought down the communist regime a year later. So even though the Slovak Christians were some of the most persecuted in the Soviet bloc, the Catholic Church thrived there because this one man saw what was coming and he prepared his people. Now, Dreher is setting that up to say, we need to be prepared as well. So he said, today, people who have survived Soviet communism are our own Kolakoviches. They're warning us of a coming totalitarianism. What does that look like? It's a form of government that combines political authoritarianism with an ideology that wants to control all aspects of our life. He said it's not going to look like USSR's. It's not going to set itself up through what he calls hard means like armed revolution or gulags. But he said it's going to start in soft forms. It's going to be what he calls therapeutic totalitarianism. It'll mask its hatred of dissenters in the guise of, we just want to help you. We're just trying to heal you. So he said, to see what totalitarianism is going to look like, he said we have to understand the difference between it and simple authoritarianism. So he says authoritarianism is what you have when the state monopolizes political control. Now, that's dictatorship. He said that's bad, but totalitarianism is actually worse than dictatorship. So a totalitarian society is one where an ideology tries to push out any other prior tradition and institutions. It wants to bring everything in that society under control of whatever the ideology is. So it aspires to nothing less than actually defining and controlling reality. Truth is whatever those rulers decide it is. And somebody once said, whenever totalitarianism has taken over, it's begun to destroy the essence of people. So a totalitarian state doesn't want to just control your actions, telling you what to see and what to say and what to do. They want to control your thoughts and your emotions. He said the ideal subject for a totalitarian state is someone who's learned to love Big Brother. Oh. So he said today's totalitarianism, what we're going to be dealing with, demands allegiance to a set of progressive beliefs. And actually, a lot of them are incompatible with logic. And they're certainly incompatible with Christianity. Now, he hasn't gotten to that yet, but here's one that strikes me. You talk about progressive beliefs that are incompatible with logic. I think of transgenderism. To take somebody who says he or she is the opposite sex, I mean, it's just going against reality, isn't it? It's just incompatible with logic. So he says compliance in these kinds of totalitarian situations is forced not so much by the state, but it's by the elites, the people who form public opinion, and private corporations that control our lives way more than we like to admit. So can I just stop there for a minute? So he says it's not going to be the state. It's not going to be armed thugs out on the street. He says it's going to be the elites who form public opinion. And let me stop there for a minute. I bet you can think of a lot of elites that people look to. Now, the elites could be professors. They could be politicians. I think even if you want to say some of the media stars. And he said also what's going to form this are private corporations and the way they can control our lives. Yeah, exactly. I can think of several major corporations that are busy doing that right now. He says many people today that are conservative, they fail to grasp this threat. They just say, oh, it's just political correctness. It's just wokeness. Said it's just hysteria. He said, well, wait till people get out in the real world and get a job. It's just people on campus that are protesting. But he said, dissenters from that party line find their business and their career and their reputation. Everything gets destroyed. They're pushed out of the public square. They're stigmatized. They get canceled. And they're demonized, aren't they? I mean, how many times have you heard the word racist thrown around? Or fascist, or sexist, or homophobe. So that's the soft totalitarianism. They don't take a gun to you. They don't take a thug to your house to knock it down. they go after your reputation. They ruin your career, whatever it is. So he said, what's going on today? He said, left-wing totalitarianism today appeals to what he calls an internal hunger. And there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, people, for example, he says people want a just society, one that liberates people who've been oppressed. Now, it comes across as kindness, and it demonizes people that don't agree with it, and they want to protect the feeling of these victims to bring about what they call social justice. Now, I've got a book or two on social justice, and I've done some podcasts on that as well. So what they will do, this cult of social justice, what goes on, people get identified as victimizers, as scapegoats, and they talk about suppressing these bad people. So they're called SJWs, right? Social justice warriors. And they start out saying, we have great compassion. And what do they end up? They end up embracing an aggressive and a punitive system, especially politics. He said that one critic, I think this is interesting, a cultural critic at the turn of the 21st century, so right around 2000, here's what one person, Girard was his last name, he warned, the current process of spiritual demagoguery and rhetorical overkill has transformed the concern for victims into a totalitarian command and a permanent inquisition. Boy, does that strike home. I mean, just look around today. First of all, he calls it rhetorical overkill. Yeah, if somebody disagrees with you, you're Hitler. You're a fascist. You're a Nazi. You're a killer. Right there, I'm an English teacher, and I think about rhetorical overkill. Name call, get hysterical, and people react. And he said it's turned the concern for victims into a totalitarian command, right? It's not enough to try to help people. It's what you have to do. And he says a permanent inquisition. Boy, I would say not only is the Inquisition permanent, but it's turning on its own. People that were on that side, if they don't exactly do everything the exact way, that people go back 10 years and find one thing they said, then they're thrown into the prison as well. So interesting phrase there, permanent inquisition. He says that's what the survivors of communism are saying us today. It's really nice that liberalism wants to care for the weak and the marginalized. That's great. But it's turning into a monstrous ideology. He says if that's not stopped, it's going to turn liberal democracy into a softer therapeutic form of totalitarianism. Because after all, they're just trying to help people. So he gets on to explaining what he means by the therapeutic as a postmodern mode of existence. Said it exploits our preference for personal pleasures over principles. So the public will support this coming soft totalitarianism, not because they're afraid of going to jail, but it's more satisfying to them because they get all sorts of hedonistic comforts out of it. He says, you know what's coming? He says it's not going to be 1984. He really doesn't think that's coming. He says it's going to be more like Brave New World, right? So if you've ever heard of Brave New World, all the people are on drugs, and all they want to do is live a safe, comforting life. And he says that's what's happening. So it's a feeling of well-being, and that's going to be the goal of everybody today. We want to be happy and to be satisfied in life. And he mentions a book called The Triumph of the Therapeutic in 1966. That's a long time ago. But the author, Rieff, R-I-E-F-F, in case you want to get a hold of the book, he said the death of God in the West had given birth to a new civilization, right? We got rid of God, and what do we have instead? Well, the individual gets liberated to seek what? Pleasures, and get rid of anxieties. So that's it. So no longer were we seeing ourselves as pilgrims on some kind of meaningful journey with others. We're a tourist, and we're traveling through life according to our own itinerary. Now, what's our ultimate goal? Personal happiness. He said that was a radical revolution. So he said for the first time, human beings were seeking to create a civilization, getting rid of all binding transcendent order. So if there's no sacred order out there, in other words, God, then you make yourself, right? You'll make yourself God. And he said even church leaders were lying to themselves about the ability of the institutions they led to resist this therapeutic. He said religions have many of them, different churches have kind of devolved into watery spirituality, he said, that goes along with this. says in 2005, sociologists coined the phrase moralistic therapeutic deism to say what's going on in America today in many Christian churches. So what does that mean? They even capitalize it, moralistic therapeutic deism. It's a belief that, yeah, God exists, and what does he want from us? Just to be nice and to be happy. So the greatest sin in our society today is what? Standing in the way of the freedom of others so they can find their own happiness. Yeah, it goes hand in hand with a sexual revolution. So there's no economic class struggle anymore. It's just do what you want. And so he mentions transgenderism. He said that's just part of what's going on today. You affirm somebody's psychology over biological reality. And he said Christian resistance to this, what's going on, has been fruitless. He said it probably will. He said even the spirit of the therapeutic has conquered churches as well. He said hardly any contemporary Christians are prepared to suffer for the faith. Why? Well, the idea of bearing pain for the sake of truth, that seems pretty silly, doesn't it? Yeah, I agree. Okay, so I think what I will do, let me go right to the end of the first chapter here. So in 1974, he has a little subtitle, by the way, here called Living in Truth. In 1974, Alexander Solzhenitsyn, on the day of his Moscow arrest, published his final message to the Russian people before he got booted out to the West. And the title of that exhortation, he urged the Russian people, here we go, to live not by lies. So what do you mean by living by lies? He said, well, accepting without any protest all these falsehoods and propaganda the state compelled its citizens to affirm so that you get along peaceably and you'd have a nice, comfy life. Everybody says they don't have any choice. They need to conform to Solzhenitsyn and to accept being powerless. But he said that's a lie that gives all the other lies their force. He said the ordinary person may not be able to overturn that whole kingdom of lies, but at least he can say he's not going to be its loyal subject. So what does that look like? Now, this is Solzhenitsyn again. He says a person who refuses to live by lies does these things. He will not say, write, affirm, or distribute anything that distorts the truth. He will not go to a demonstration or participate in a collective action unless he truly believes in the cause. He will not take part in a meeting in which the discussion is forced and no one can speak the truth. He will not vote for a candidate or proposal he considers to be dubious or unworthy. He'll walk out of an event as soon as he hears a speaker utter a lie or propaganda. He won't support journalism that distorts or hides the underlying facts. Wow, I just think about what's going on today. I mean, I'm ashamed to say I go along with some of these things that are out there, and yet we're not supposed to live by lies, right? Live not by lies. Now he says the task, I'm back to Dreher now, the task of the Christian dissident today is to personally commit himself or herself to live not by lies. How do you do that? Can you do it alone? Well, no. Dreher says we need authentic spiritual leadership. Clerical or lay leadership. We need to have small cells of fellow believers where we can pray and sing and study Scripture, and you can discuss what's going on out there. So there are the 3 points again. We need to identify the challenge, discern together what it means for us, and then act on our conclusions. There we go again. See, judge, act. And that's the way he's wrapping up this first chapter. We need to see. We need to really look around. We need to judge it against the standards of the Bible and Jesus. And then we need to act. So he says, and this is the very last of the first chapter, soft totalitarianism is coming. Ooh, I hate to see that, but I think he's probably right. And he said the next chapter is going to show how the groundwork has already been laid. So I'm going to stop at this point. But again, the book is called Live Not by Lies. Not a fun book to read, but I think it's an awfully important book that we need to get a hold of. One person who is a co-editor of the Solzhenitsyn Reader says, I can't imagine a more timely and urgent book or one with a more enduring spiritual, political, and cultural message. Yeah, I agree with that. Live Not by Lies, Rod Dreher, Dreher. Well, thank you for being part of this podcast, and I think this has been a good challenge to all of us to see and judge and act. All right, well, thanks. Take care.